Hey everyone, Switch here. In this what if scenario video, I'm going to talk about the Vikings. The Vikings, as we all know, which were from Scandinavia, which involves Norway, Denmark and Sweden. The Vikings are well-known sea travelers and were very skilled navigators on the ocean. But they were also traders and warriors and plunderers of all other things. They plundered a lot of the old world. But during their time of during the Viking Age, suddenly the Vikings started to leave Denmark and Norway, including my own country, Sweden, for new places. There may have been that the reason as that there were overpopulation and there maybe was not less fertile land for that or overcrowded. So they started to be exploring other lands. Because during the time of the Viking Age, they had been aware of the Great Britain or England at the time, and so they had traveled a lot of different places. During the Viking Age, the Vikings traveled all the way down as so far as North Africa and even Constantinople in Turkey. And they even sailed as far east as Russia. And as they sailed later on the west, they came to Iceland and even Greenland. But it also had been discovered that in 1960, on an island in northern Canada, on a site known as Lowndes Oaks Meadows, had been remains of buildings found, which were dated approximately 1,000 years ago. But now we know exactly the exact date when that settlement was built, 1021 AD. But I'm not going to talk about the Vikings' progress in when they settled in mainly in England, Russia, and even other places. My main focus on is in fact the North American settlement. The settlement was founded in 1021 AD, but the settlement wasn't really that long lasted though. It was only there for a short time, considering that the settlements on Greenland lasted for almost 500 years. So why was then as the North American colony or settlement, which they called Vinland, or which will translate to like a wine land? Why was it that only place that was only short lasted? Well, we don't know for sure exactly, but it may have been the Native Americans that may not have been hostile towards the newcomers. So that might be in the reason why the Viking settlement in Canada would have been interrupted or at least abandoned. But what if the Vikings didn't, but was forced to leave North America? What if the Native Americans and the Vikings actually came along? Well, what if they actually were able to be friends? That means the Vikings would have been able to colonize more of the North American, continent, since the Norse exploration of North America began in the late 10th century. And since the Vikings had already colonized Iceland and Greenland, and since Greenland was the last one before they discovered a North American continent by accident, it was actually the Viking named Leif Erikson, the son of the famous Eric the Red, the Viking, who discovered the North American continent. But, like I said, what if the North American continent would have had a bigger Viking settlement? Since the one on Greenland lasted for almost 500 years, and the one on the one on Iceland is still pretty much lasted the longest. And in fact, majority of the population on Iceland is mainly descendants of the ancient Vikings. But now let's focus on the North American continent itself. Since we know that only one small settlement has been found in the northern island of Canada. But what if the Canada's population of the Native Americans actually was getting well along with the Vikings? Like I said, the Vikings was not always not always warriors and plunderers. They were also farmers. So, considering for one detail, when the Pilgrims, the early British, came to America in the early mid 1600s, they were actually welcomed and even saved by the Native American tribes in the area. So why would not there be any indication to be like the same with the Vikings? If the Vikings and the Native Americans in Canada region actually was getting well along, and perhaps they could even start trading with each other, and perhaps they could have been sending for more people over to North America to start bigger settlements. If the North American settlement in Newfoundland in the northern part of Canada had been a successful colonized, what been assuming that the Vikings could eventually been spreading deeper into Canada, and even perhaps as so far as south as the North America, like United States, because in the late 1800s, a Swedish immigrant says that he found a stone, which is now called as the Kennington Stone runestone. It's reported to be had this Viking inscription from the year 1362 AD, but that's impossible, since the Viking Age lasted only from 793 AD to 1066 AD. So the Viking Age was over long before even that happened, since the stone had been alleged to be fake. And that stone was found near Minnesota in the Midwest of United States. But assuming if the colony in North Newfoundland in Canada was a success, and that small settlement had been expanded to be even much bigger colony, and that since that the Native Americans actually still get along well with the Viking settlers, so assuming if that happened, the Vikings may started to realize maybe there was more land even more south, so they decided to send a small group of sailing ships. Like I mentioned, they were skilled seamen. They were skilled sailors and very skilled navigators, among the best in Europe at that time. So what if saying this? I mean, if that is possible that they had already had a successful colony in a Newfoundland in Canada, and if that settlement had been grown as much bigger, and they decided why not to send out another smaller group of ships even further down south to find some maybe more lands to be settling. Well, that is the problem there. Like I said, it's possible that it's since that it's a little bit difficult to figure out exactly what happened if they would manage to build a settlement. I mean, since in reality, the Canadian Viking settlement was abandoned shortly afterwards. But assuming what if that settlement became successful? I mean, if this was only remained, even became bigger, and that they decided to send a large group of ships with Vikings to find some other places to build other settlements in deeper down along the American continent, like say if they came to New York or Delaware region, because during the 1600s, Sweden actually built a colony in around the Delaware region. So, assuming if the Vikings would eventually sail it's that far south, and that they started to build a small new settlement. But the thing is, that particular region was inhabited by numerous of other Native American tribes. Some maybe could have been very friendly towards the Viking settlers, but some of them may have even been could have been hostile towards the Vikings. And if the one of the hostile tribes was making it such difficult for them to last any longer, maybe the Vikings decide to abandon that particular settlement, and then they didn't think maybe it wasn't worth of being continued to travel even further south. But if that settlement of the Vikings in deeper down in a North American continent, like in the United States, would have also been successful, despite that maybe there were some hostile Native American tribes. I mean, that's happened when new strangers come to their land and just conquer it. But what if this actually did happen, and that the Vikings decided, and if that settlement was became successful? And what if the Vikings decided to travel even further inland of North America, like United States, and to find endless of prey of animals like deers, elks, and even wild boars, and all kinds of supplies, and find the land as very fertile to support a larger settlement. I can get one as an example. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, there were a lot of misgrowth in Sweden during that time period. And 1.8 million Swedish people migrated from Sweden to United States hoping to find some new home and new future. And the land was actually give many Swedish immigrants decided to stay in America. And that means a lot of them actually still remain there, and to this day 4 million Americans can actually have a Swedish American ancestry. So if that is possible, that they could have traveled from America, but still that was in the more modern time. But if we can assuming as a what if that the successful colonization of northern Canada of around 1021 AD, if that colony would have been successful and over time grew larger, and that the Vikings decided to send some other ships even further south along the American continent, and what if they came up to one place and that land was very fertile and rich of animal, and that this was a very ideal place to start another settlement. And if that they were also approached by friendly Native American tribes, and they could cooperate, work together, coexist, as despite not being able to understand each other from the first, but if that's true, that could happen. They could have been even if that second colony would also grow larger. It's possible they could even went even deeper in the mainland itself and started other Viking colonies. So assuming from that happened, if the Vikings had managed to have a successful colonization of North America in Canada for a bigger, larger colony or settlement, as we call it, and that it also became that they decided to spread deeper south along the American continent's coastline to find some new land to settle and even form a new settlement. And if that happened, and that it's possible if that happened, like what if that happened? A lot of towns and perhaps names of streets could actually have a Viking inspired name. I can give one example. That the Vikings, they did actually colonize the North America, Great Britain, and even Ireland. And on Ireland, there's still names on streets, and even in England, there's still some street names that's based on Scandinavian heritage. So it's possible that could actually have happened, even include if that happened with the Vikings' successful colonization of North American continent. There could have been have been now tons of streets along across the United States with Viking inspired names, street names, and even cities, the towns that could have been could have been was founded by the Vikings or even their Viking descendants. Assuming that's possible, like what if that the North American colonization of the Vikings was successful in North America? But that is as well as a big if. And that is based on my opinions and thoughts about this. And if you have your own theories and or opinions about this, let me know in the comment section below. And as always, this is Swedish Diablo, over and out.